begin by asking the question, what does it mean for a young person to thrive? This is where we really wanted to dive more deeply as we sought to develop the portrait of a thriving youth. And when we talk about a thriving youth, we mean a young person who's not only doing well across the various dimensions of development, but who really has the internal capacity as well as the external resources that they need to continue to do well. So therefore, thriving is both holistic and dynamic. We also know that settings matter and systems matter. So thriving is not the sole responsibility of each adolescent. Thriving is not just a marker of one's present state, it's also a trajectory that one is on. So as we consider this holistic and dynamic picture, today we'll share more about why we went about developing the portrait, how we hope it will be used, and a primer on what we've depicted as the 6 domains of thriving. So the portrait depicts really the full period of adolescence, from early to middle to late adolescence and through to young adulthood, encompassing the range of ages about 10 to 25. It surfaces the developmental needs, assets, and milestones that a young person might experience throughout this time. We know that this is a developmental period that's really rich with opportunity to learn and to grow, both by way of brain development as well as physical development. We also know that the trajectory of adolescent development is really as unique as each individual adolescent and highly impacted by the systems and settings in which young people learn and grow. So the portrait isn't a how-to guide to creating those systems and settings. Many sectors, such as youth development and education, have their own implementation frameworks and toolkits, and we don't intend to compete with or complicate the good works that's happening in communities across the country to promote healthy adolescent learning and development. In fact, the idea for this portrait was really sparked by the portrait of a graduate that educators, leaders, and policymakers across the country have been designing to illustrate the characteristics that high school graduates should have upon completion of the 12th grade. So the aim of the portrait of a thriving youth is to expand that illustration, to depict really the full range of skills and competencies that contribute to a thriving adolescent over the course of their development, from early adolescence through into young adulthood. So with that in mind, my colleague Priscilla Little will share more about what the portrait is.
Thank you, Nancy, and let me share my welcome to have all of you here this afternoon. We really appreciate the time you're taking out of your day to learn about this new work. In truth, I'm sitting at a teen center at a Boys and Girls Club, and while I'm seeing thriving in action, there will be some background noise while I speak. As Nancy said, the portrait is not a how-to guide. It's really a North Star for everyone supporting the development of young people. And we really hope everyone on this call can see themselves contributing to thriving. It builds a collective and broadly understood vision of what a thriving youth might do as individuals and as part of their communities. It depicts what optimal youth development looks like during the period of adolescence, when the structures and systems are in place to support and promote thriving. And that's really critical, that thriving will happen only when the support structures and systems are in place. And finally, the portrait provides practitioners, policymakers, and researchers with an anchor point to ground their work and make decisions. And it provides young people and their caregivers a common language to advocate for the systems and settings that they really need to support thriving. So while the portrait focuses on all the domains of thriving that are important for adolescents and consider how they appear within individual youth, we acknowledge that it's the responsibility of all adults across all settings to ensure optimal thriving of youth. To help us really dig into the portrait, we've invited Winsome Waite to join us to walk us through the domains. Winsome Waite is not only a dear colleague, she's also a senior program director at the Opportunity Institute, and I had the true pleasure of being co-chair with her on the advisory board that helped develop the portrait. So now I'm going to turn it to Winsome. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Priscilla, and good afternoon, everyone. It's great to have you. So I'm going to quickly talk about the 6 domains and again, highlight just the high points, really encourage you to go through and read those 6 domains and make sense of them on your own. The 6 domains are interconnected. There's not one without the other in terms of a thriving youth. We do think, however, it's important to understand deeply each of the domains and to also have strategies and programs that address each of them, because it really takes all of them, each of them working together to have that holistic, thriving youth. Each of the domains in the portrait begins with what we're calling an I statement. And I'm not going to really read those I statements today, but they are important, I think, as we try to center the voice of youth, what we think youth might be saying as they're experiencing each of these 6 domains. We'll start out with the first domain, which is health. We struggled so much as we were developing this particular domain because we recognize the physical health and mental health are distinct and yet very connected. So we did separate the health into both physical and mental. When we think about physical health in adolescence, I think all of us can attest to going through that period ourselves and recognizing or remembering those physical characteristics that we had to deal with. Some of those characteristics we know are about certain things like our height changed, but also the characteristics of just a male or female. We see those very evident in the adolescent period. One of the things we want to highlight in this section too is this need for young people as they're developing physically to feel a sense of belonging, to feel the social rewards that come with what they consider or society considers acceptable appearance. So physical appearance for young people in adolescence is really very important. And again, it takes quite a bit of support from not just their peers, but certainly the adults in their life to help them have safe approaches to taking care of their physical bodies. Sleep, we know there's just a ton of research around sleep. And so we want to highlight that aspect of the growing adolescence. It's critical because we know young people of this age really demand more sleep. And actually their circadian rhythms are really different and differing one to the other during this time. What we know though for sure is that they do demand more sleep in adolescence. So this changing body and caring for it and understanding the characteristics, once they have those kinds of experiences and conditions such as healthy eating habits, such as sleep, good exercise, and supportive environments in which to grow, we know those are really important long-term to their positive self-image in life. In terms of mental health, again, so connected to physical health, here we're thinking of their emotions, their psychological and social well-being. And mental health, of course, we know really affects how we feel and how we think and how we act and how we relate to one another. It's certainly more important than just not having a mental illness. It's really more about having those high ideals for self, if you will. And it's really important during this time that we are helping our young people to really understand their coping mechanisms. What are the kinds of strategies they can use to understand when they're being triggered, and triggered both ways, positively and negatively. But what are the mitigating strategies that they can apply during this time? Again, it's important to give them time to learn, take chances or risks, if you will, be able to reflect on their own behaviors and feelings, and have supportive adults and conditions to be able to grow, to be healthy, happy, mentally well, and physically well young people. So we'll take a look now at cognition. Cognition, we say, is really that process of moving from the more concrete thinking in childhood to the more abstract thinking in adulthood. Heightened development of the prefrontal cortex is responsible for that executive functioning and the advanced cognitive skills that are so desperately needed throughout adolescence, but certainly when young people become adults, to make decisions, to be able to plan plan future, plan now and future, and also to problem solve at high levels. And this really requires very intentional support and opportunities, not just the support, but the opportunities to take risks, to be able to think about their future, begin working with other adults to plan what are the kinds of activities they want to be engaged in as they grow. We know too that the prefrontal cortex in the brain is really the last part to grow up, to mature to its fullness. And so throughout that early, mid, and late adolescence, we want to find appropriate strategies to help our young people to develop those cognitive strategies. So we look at identity. Identity in adolescence really encompasses both the thinking about who we are now, but also who we aspire to be or maybe in the future. Young people are exploring their identities in many ways: their gender, their culture, their sexual orientation, their spirituality, social activities, politics, all of those things. And a lot of times we see those identities manifested in, dress and physical appearance, cultural trends that they might be involved in. They're emerging reflections of values, beliefs, aspirations are being shaped and reshaped over time by lots of factors, peers and family and culture again, that's really helping them to build up who they are in their own identity. There's one concept that's in the portrait that we discuss quite a bit. It's called integrated identity. The development of an integrated identity, kind of that stabilization is what I think of, the internal consistency about who we are over time. Is really important in how young people over time, learn to make choices, learn to have a stable base, if you will, as conditions around them in life change. How do they remain stable in their values, in their approaches to life? So that integrated identity is a process, of course, but we want to help them through that process. So as they emerge into adulthood, they really do understand themselves. They have a strong sense of self, a strong set of values, beliefs that can help them and guide them. So we look at meaning and purpose, two concepts that we know are actually very related. As the young people are exploring their identities, they're also at the same time exploring the meaning and purpose of their lives. Who am I and why am I, actually, are questions that emerge quite a bit. Meaning and purpose, we know, are closely related, but they're actually different constructs. Meaning has to do with a lot of the internal understanding of self and the experiences that we're having. So more of the understanding why the purpose has to do a lot with what does it mean. And very often young people are trying to figure out what does it mean, like what is the right thing, what should I be doing? And one of the things we know about the developing youth, as they get older, they're really looking around at conditions and determining what's just, what's unjust, what can I do about that? What are the drivers here for me? And so those meaning and purpose are really important in terms of the long-term drivers for the life of young people. As we look at the emotion domain, we know, all of us who have been around young people going through adolescence, we're really keen on this one. We know adolescents do go through those extreme highs and lows. This is because, really honestly, because part of the brain that processes the emotions is rapidly improving and developing during adolescence. As I said before, the cognitive domain is not moving as fast as that emotional one. And so we need to understand that this results then in heightened sensitivity to any emotional experiences, content, and interpersonal cues. It is critical for young people that they develop these skills and experiences to kind of support the regulation, if you will, of emotions, not just the regulation of their own, but the understanding of other people's emotions. That's really important in different settings and in different relationships. Understanding, again, how to develop persistence, how to be adaptive, how to have compassion, courage, optimism, resilience. Those are all aspects of the domain in emotions. And the final one, number 6, is the social. Again, all interconnected. It's hard to take out the emotion from the social. Again, each of them are separate but very interconnected. So human relationships, we know, is a constant in our lives, all of us, and across the lifespan. It's so important. But during adolescence, that social brain is developing rapidly. And it is that complex network of areas within the brain that help us to understand more about the interactions we have with others and the social norms, if you will, within our society that we have to interface with. These relationships, of course, are around peers, relationships with authority figures, relationships that might lead to romance. All of those are relationships within the social sphere that our young people are dealing with. So the relationships with parents, caregivers, other supportive adults, again, remain crucial during adolescence so that our young people can develop those more social interactions and in nourishing environments, again, where they're learning to take healthy risks. That's really an important concept in this period. How do we provide opportunities for young people to take healthy risks and make good choices? The one last point I want to make is with social media. Today, we really, again, spent a lot of time discussing that aspect because a lot of our young people are growing up in the world of social media, a variety of social media. And I'm just going to tag on AI and where that's going in our lives overall. That will, a lot of that is, those aspects are having a lot of influence, if you will, about the social life of our young people, the norms they're developing. They're developing a lot of those norms just being online. So just to close out, I want to again emphasize what I think is really good work from the team at Youth-Nex. It was great to be part of it. I plan to use this portrait myself in my work, and I also encourage you to do that. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over, and I think it's back to you, Priscilla.
Thank you, Winsome. So you're probably thinking, well, this is great. How can I use this? And we've put together a couple of suggestions, but even as Winsome said, she'll use it in her work as a researcher. Certainly, we've already talked to nurses and pediatricians about the use, but for now, what we're talking about is really how can adult practitioners, including educators and youth workers, could use the portrait to reflect on their own organizational and developmental practices and take a really holistic approach to the systems and settings where their young people are spending their time. Abby, we can go to the next slide. We're also thinking that policymakers could use the portrait to help make research-informed decisions about resource allocation and systems support for adolescents. Certainly, caregivers can use the portrait to help adolescents make healthy choices about where to spend time. And youth can advocate for the supports, services, and settings that they know will help them thrive. And as I said, there are many other stakeholder groups that we hope will see themselves in the use of the portrait. We are in the process of developing some tools to make the portrait accessible and actionable. And I just want to share a very simple self-assessment tool that we created. So for each of the domains of thriving, the tool asks you to reflect on whether or not the domain is a priority for your setting, because understanding that not all settings may support all aspects of thriving, but you will be supporting a few, and then how robust the supports are. So for each of the aspects, consider the priority. on a scale of 1 to 5 and consider the reflection questions at the end. So for example, for healthy physical development, establishing healthy physical behaviors, and we just pulled a few constructs: exercising and developing healthy eating habits, getting adequate sleep and rest, understanding and establishing self-care and personal hygiene practices, and then reflect on, that's not really a priority for me, or, it's a priority, but we're really not doing it very well, or, it's a priority and we really haven't nailed. And so you can just scroll through the next couple of slides, Abby, to show that we've done this for each of the domains. And there's a link to this on the landing page of the portrait, which I know will be shared at the end of the webinar. And finally, the tool ends with a set of reflection questions. So understanding that you may be doing something well, what could you do to help others and to do things in other domains? And we're really encouraging you in the reflection tool to think not about your organizational practices, but what are the resources, professional development training, staffing, and organizational policies and partnerships that really are going to promote or inhibit your capacity as a really strong practitioner to be able to implement thriving. We also really encourage you to think about, for the areas that you indicated are not a priority, because you may not be particularly focused on health in terms of physical activity, are there other programs in your community that address those areas? And if so, how do you build the partnership so you end up with really an ecosystem of supports across a community that support thriving? We're also, on the next slide, in the early stages of developing some one-page tip sheets for various stakeholder groups. This is an example of one that some students at Youth-Nex have developed for educators. It's in draft form and it still needs work, but you'll see that what it does is break down some key constructs of a domain and then helps you give some resources. So you can, these blue links are clickable, where you'll get more resources to support your work. And again, these are a work in progress that we will also have on our website.